From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. Hero to assassin. We talk to a Russian journalist behind explosive revelations in the Skripal poisoning. Macedonian suppression. Is there a campaign to keep people home ahead of a key referendum? Honoring Jo Cox. The slain politician's family talks extremism as a Brussels square is named in her honor. Fighting fake news. Is technology the problem or the solution when it comes to disinformation? And paging Mr. Kurd. U.S. President Donald Trump becomes a hero on Twitter by accident. It's good to have you with us. Now it's time to meet our panel. We have Andrew Byrne. He is the Europe correspondent for the Sunday Times based here in Brussels. Andrew, which of these stories do you like?
Well, I'm watching right now the Macedonia story very closely, this referendum on Sunday. Will it be the vote that opens this country's path to EU and NATO membership, or will it consign it to further isolation?
Isn't that the question? We're also joined by Eva Kaili. She is a Greek MEP with the Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. Eva, which of these stories are you watching?
Well, I think, of course, the issue of former Yugoslavic Republic of Macedonia, as currently named. I think it's really important. And, of course, fake news is something we're trying to deal with also from the European Parliament, trying to have tools. We have upcoming elections in a few months. So I think it's crucial for us to make sure that everything will be as it should.
Keeping a close eye on that as well. And also, we are joined by Andrei Bekatov. He's a correspondent for Euronews' Russian service. Andrei, which of these stories are you watching?
I'm fascinated with the Russian poisoning story. It would be a real spy thriller, but of course, people died as a result of these events in Britain.
Indeed. They say truth is stranger than fiction, isn't it? All right, we will have a lot more on those stories. First, our top story. It is the world is waiting for the reaction from the Kremlin after an explosive report identified one of the alleged assassins in the Salisbury poisonings as a Russian military hero, allegedly honored by Vladimir Putin himself. Now, it's the latest twist in a saga that has put divisions between Russia and the West front and center. Now, the man in question is Anatoly Vladimirovich Shepiga, an alleged Russian Special Forces colonel. Investigative websites Bellingcat and the Insider Russia say he's one of the men accused of poisoning former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in March. British authorities had originally identified the man by his alias Ruslan Bushirov. He appeared on Russian TV with his alleged accomplice just weeks ago, saying that they had been on holiday in the UK at that time. All right, I did interview Roman Dobrokhotov earlier. He's a Russian journalist who helped break the story. He and his team at the Insider Russia spoke to sources in the Russian security services, and they gained access to passport database. I spoke to him and asked him what this suggests about Putin's alleged involvement.
Only Vladimir Putin could do it himself. First of all, we speak not just about some GRU agents. We speak about very prominent people. So one of them, Ruslan Bashirov, also known as Anatoly Shepiga, he was honored as hero of Russia, and this medal is given only personally by the president in Russia. So that means that he personally met with Shepiga, and of course he knew him very well after that. So when Putin says that these are not military guys and so on, he's absolutely evidently lying, because he personally gave him medal.
But what about Vladimir Putin himself? Do you think he will come out and say otherwise, it changed what he had said?
I think it will be easier for him just to keep the line and to deny everything as he used to do, because it will be too difficult to invent some other theory. So I think they would just try to discredit Bellingcat and the Insider, as they already started, and they will just ignore every other facts and reaction. But he still is in very difficult position, because we have all the evidence, and of course Great Britain will push on the Russian government, trying to get the answer, so he's in a big political trouble.
Okay, and Roman, finally, something surprising to you as well is the fact that these two men were able to get a visa. Why is that surprising to you?
That will be in our next part of the issue that we are going to publish next week, because that's indeed surprising that people that had no business no registered business at all. I got a business visa in Great Britain. It's very difficult to do usually. You have to bring a lot of papers, and they had no papers at all, no real document history. So there was definitely some influence of Russian security services on British visa center, and we already know a lot about that, and we are going to publish it very soon.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Roman.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Roman there was talking about evidence that they had found and presented to the public. Did the governments learn anything today? Is that a smoking gun? Did they learn anything today that they didn't already know? Andrew?
I don't think so. I think the response from the British intelligence services, which has been not to deny these findings by Bellingcat, I think in a sense it proves the story as we've been told it so far by the British side. But I think what strikes me time and time again with this story is just the audacity at each step of this story. The more we learn, the more threadbare the cover story that these guys gave in their interview in Russian television appears. And just the fact that
it's very brazen, isn't it?
It's very brazen. Brazen to the point where you would almost think that it's intentionally obvious. You know, why create a cover story involving prominent Russian colonels that can be so easily disproven, unless, in a sense, you kind of want to be seen.
But the question there is why. I'll put that to you, Andre. I mean, why? Why is this the strategy that we're seeing playing out, and how is it playing out in Russia?
Well, from what we have seen, we can clearly see that Kremlin rewards loyalty, a good service, and doesn't tolerate dissent, and especially treason. Now we have a hero, a person, a Chipiga, who definitely considers himself a really good soldier and who disregards other people's interests, like for him attacking, well, we don't know, but it's between Russians.
So you think this is more domestic?
It is very, very much domestic, but when it takes us to the foreign arena, it's Skripal who was attacked on British soil, and this is definitely a message to others like him. You can't cross the line, you have to toe the line, and if not, we will get you wherever you are, even abroad. And by the way, my own inside in Kremlin told me a very similar case was Khodorkovsky, the Russian billionaire who was the richest, considered the cleanest oligarch, and yet the richest man. He was vulnerable as well when he didn't quite behave according to Kremlin rules. So these are, it's very much a different way of thinking.
Yeah, Eva, you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say that in several European countries, just like 20, 30 years ago, there was death penalty for treason, especially in secret services. But we have moved to different reactions now. Imprisonment is chosen. So I think it's a very interesting discussion here, and I do agree it's an example or a message sent inside the country against anything that could cause national threat.
But the thing is, I was talking to Roman, the journalist, earlier, and I asked him whether in Russia, whether people believed the cover story, and they said, well, no one actually believed it in Russia, and no one actually cares much about, you know, how they're perceived. Is that true, Andre, your analysis?
They want to believe it because it portrays Russia as a powerful, almost superpower, which Russian pride is very important.
Who is the audience?
For the whole people who vote for Putin.
Okay.
Because stability is very important, and this is another way of assuring stability. Because people want to regain their pride. They want, look, Euronews is discussing the situation. The world is talking about it. That could be the aim of whatever happened. The aim is that to hide. Well, we all know who did it, and yet we have no hard evidence. And this is exactly the way they wanted to portray. The same happened with Crimea. Nobody knows exactly who invaded it, but we know, but we were not.
Well,
it wasn't
we wait
approved.
For the evidence.
So that's.
Yeah, so now we are waiting actually for reaction from around the world, but we have a reaction from British Prime Minister Theresa May because she talked about Russia during a speech at the UN General Assembly, and she appeared to make reference to the new revelations. Take a look at this.
States like Russia flagrantly breach international norms, from the seizing of sovereign territory to the reckless use of chemical weapons on the streets of Britain by agents of the Russian GRU.
Now, going back to the point you made, Andrew, about the brazenness of the way that this is done, is there a point where it has moved from being a covert war, let's use the word, to overt?
I think so, and I think that what Russia is doing now is pushing at the limits of this. I mean, if you look at this case from the very beginning, these two guys went over to the UK ostensibly because they have an interest in obscure cathedral towns, and they trailed chemical weapons around the place like they were carrying an overfilled cup of coffee. And then the story that's given out afterwards, I think, Andrew, what you say is very true. I mean, the story has to be incredible because people need to see that there's a message to those who are part of the Russian secret services who then turn their backs on it. So I think, in a sense, there's many messages, and I don't think the Russian state really wants to establish truth in this case or even create a convincing alternative truth. They want to establish doubt. They want to create uncertainty around everything so that people around the world simply can't put their finger really on who they can trust in these stories.
So how does one deal with that, Eva, from a political, legal point of view? How does one deal with that? Sanctions, asset freezes? I mean, do these really work? So how do you move forward?
I think national security is an issue that nations deal with because, as I said, each country, each state has a different law about it. But I think that it's an indication of how Russia would treat such cases. And this is maybe something for us to take in and not overlook. And I would say there are strong indications in this case that there was knowledge and involvement of the government. So I'm not sure we have the right to do anything about that.
And no answer yet on how to deal with Russia at this point?
Well, at this point, we already have strong sanctions and we already have a very careful approach to Russia. But at the same time, we have a diplomatic way of trying to deal with these things. And I think now it's well stated that we are aware of the ways they use.
All right, very quickly, Andrei, in 10 seconds, what do you think Putin wants to gain out of this? I mean, how does he want the world to treat him and react to him?
He wants to be re-elected, and he's now looking for a new way of prolonging his presidency. And for him, the result is that people, despite internal difficulties, they're rallied behind him because we are, he means, surrounded by enemies, and you should be consolidated around Kremlin.
All right. Thank you for that to our panelists. So let's move on to another story we're watching, because on Sunday, Macedonians will vote in a referendum on whether to add North to their country's name. But this is about much more than just rebranding. At its heart, it's about national identity and cultural heritage. The name change could end a 27-year dispute with neighboring Greece, finally making membership of the EU and NATO possible for the Balkan nation. Prime Minister Zoran Zaev and his Greek counterpart Alexis Tsipras have been striving for thorn relations, but a yes vote is not the last hurdle. All right, well, one of those hurdles might just be election interference. Well, we have Alex and the Cube team in Lyon who have been looking into this part of the story. Alex, what have you found?
Well, Tessa, a big part of this story is the online campaign against participation in the referendum. We've been digging into this in the Cube. Needless to say, it's a very complicated issue. We will be digging into it more as the referendum approaches. Let's just show you this. This is a website we have identified using a hashtag that has been used tens of thousands of times, shared tens of thousands of times. It is this hashtag here. It means boycott. And just look at the visuals here. That is the ballot box, and here, boycott, right across the front of it. Now, why? Why boycott? Well, obviously, as you were saying there, the aim of the referendum is to try and reach some resolution on whether the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia becomes the Republic of North Macedonia. But that referendum needs 50% turnout to be legitimate. A boycott campaign is encouraging people not to take part. Why? Just look at the mission statement on this particular website, one of those at the forefront here. It's to prevent the generational sin and preserve for future generations. Basically, they're calling it a mass citizen rebellion against the legitimization of historical treason through an illegal power grab and referendum fraud. Now, this website, again, we have done a search on it. We do not know who is behind it, but we do know the domain name is based in Greece. That is all the information we've been able to glean at this stage. Let's just take you through some of the mission statements. They've got a long campaign here. They're saying their activities are aiming people to stop people from going and taking part in this referendum. But look at some of the imagery here. Pepe the Frog, that is a straight-up symbol of the alt-right, and many people sharing, using this hashtag in their accounts, whether those accounts are authentic or behaving like bots in authentic accounts. Either way, many are identifying as right-wing, proud nationalists, seeing this as an international campaign, or presenting it as such, against the people, the Macedonian people, and calling, therefore, for a boycott of the referendum. Let me just leave you with this. It's not just it's not just on that website. Here's an example of an English language tweet showing you the kind of imagery people are using with hashtags both in English and in other languages as well. You can see here, Tessa, regardless who's behind it, there is a concerted online campaign encouraging people to boycott this referendum.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Well, clearly people are getting active, involved in this upcoming referendum. Eva, why is this referendum so important and what's at stake?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm Macedonian from Greece. So you understand national identity is a real issue that is not being resolved. So I would agree that the solution should be erga omnes. And this is a very strong case that I saw now. It's being discussed in this country. Of course, we really need a solution. And we have in NATO, we have with Turkey a lot of tension. We need stronger allies. And we have to have an erga omnes solution. So I would say that there are some things left to be agreed. And of course, the referendum would be valid if it's 50% of the presence of the voters, and still it's non-binding, so it has to go through the parliament. So we still have enough steps ahead to make sure that we have a solid solution that will not hide all these decades what the government of Fyrom was, decades of irredentism.
If the name change doesn't go through, what is the impact?
Well, first of all, it has to pass through the parliament and both parliaments,
sure,
actually, also the Greek parliament. And as I said, it's still reversible as long as the constitution has not been changed. So they have to change constitution. Irredentism is there, yeah, and we have to have good faith among allies to be able to work together and include them in a coalition, an alliance like NATO and the European Union.
And I think, Andrew, that's the crux of it, right? You were mentioning the EU-NATO accession being a part of it. Fyrom wants to be a part of it. That is at the heart of the matter here, is it?
Yeah, I mean, just to place this in context, I mean, what's at stake in this vote on Sunday, I mean, people might wonder Macedonia is a small Balkan country, but what is at stake here is a country that has been isolated and consigned on the EU's southeastern flank for close to 3 decades. And if it can pass this referendum, the hope is that it can open the doors to EU and NATO membership, which is important not only for that country and for the young people there who are looking for opportunities despite bleak economic conditions and a very polarised politics. There's also a lot at stake for the EU as well to be able to show that it can be a force for stability in the region. I think the Greek government should be commended for actually working on this negotiated compromise, because there are nationalist forces in both countries who don't want this to succeed. And there are also forces outside of these countries. I mean, we saw on the Cube there, we don't know who is behind this website. We don't know where it's being funded from. But what we do know is that the Greek and Macedonian government have reported that foreign intelligence agents are trying to sow dissent in both countries and sow opposition to this deal. So it's actually very, very important.
And Andrei, briefly, I mean, Russia is watching this very closely, isn't it?
There's been a remarkable increase of Russian diplomatic activity in the whole region, especially with Bosnia-Herzegovina and contacts with the Serbian leader Dodik. And as we know, there were allegations of Russian plot in Montenegro. So all this region, Russia is desperate to keep it. But it's probably feels that it's lost its Slavic brothers. But now
is there talk in Russia about interference? I mean, we were saying we don't know where this comes from. Is there talk in Russia? You're hearing anything about that?
They talk in the West. They accuse Russia of interfering in the same way it did in Brexit campaign, in American elections. But I would split NATO and the EU issue, because we noticed that there's real serious resistance to these countries' NATO aspirations. But as for EU, it's less so, because Russians are probably realizing that it's better to have its allies inside the EU, like Hungary and some other pro-Russian forces, but NATO is a taboo. NATO is a no-go, because Russia feels it's threatened more and more, that it's encircled by the NATO countries, and they wouldn't let this happen.
A referendum on name change actually has geopolitical implications. All right, we'll leave it at that for now. We're watching that. on Sunday, that referendum. Now it's time for our power play, and it's all about Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Let's take a look. It was 2 years ago. Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan faced a dramatic coup. It failed, and he responded by tightening his grip on power. Well, he threw tens of thousands of activists and journalists behind bars, including some German citizens. Well, that sent Turkish-German relations into a tailspin. But look who's in town today. Erdogan is receiving full military honors in Berlin as he makes his first state visit to Germany. He's even being thrown a state dinner in lavish surroundings. But several opposition leaders are refusing to attend. They're concerned about extending the hand of friendship to a man who, just a few months ago, accused Germany of Nazi tactics. But with close trading ties and a deal on migrants, it may be in Angela Merkel's interest to make friends. So you think really they're friends just like that? What do you think?
Well, I think if we needed yet another illustration of the pragmatism of Angela Merkel, this is it. I mean, I don't think it's for the goodness of her own heart that she has allowed this visit to take place and that she's hosting Mr. Erdogan. Obviously, this is realpolitik, the kind of approach to politics that she has been known for. People often talk about how it was Angela Merkel who opened Europe's doors to the refugees, but it was also Angela Merkel who struck a deal with Mr. Erdogan to close that route along the Western Balkan route. So
that is important.
I think that's the light we have to see this in.
And speaking, since we've been talking about Russia, this whole bloc so far, Eva, I mean, when Turkey was at odds with the EU and with Germany, it was turning towards Russia. Do you think this is going to change that alliance and, it's good for the EU?
Well, I'm not sure, but I hope, because trying to get closer to the European Union means it will try to be closer to the values of European Union. So at the same time that he wants more people to be able to protest in Germany, Turkish, the same time it's restricting freedom of speech in Turkey. And this means that we have, for the time being, not a clear understanding of what his strategy will be, but I do hope he will be closer to the European Union.
All right, thank you very much for that. We have a lot more coming up for you in the program. The fact checkers on the front lines of the war against fake news. Plus, remembering Jo Cox. As a new square is unveiled in her name, we talk to her sister about the current climate of politics. Welcome back to World Politics. Now, with election after election rocked by misinformation and trust in mainstream media waning, the EU is on a fact-finding mission from fact-checkers. Yesterday, tech titans Google and Twitter unveiled plans they say would help Europeans make informed decisions when faced with fake news. But in the meantime, the EU is taking its own steps. Let's take a look at what Dutch MEP Marietje Schaake had to say on the matter earlier today.
I also think the term fake news is quite difficult because it is so often used to dismiss unfavorable opinions. Look at what the US president is doing, labeling entire newspapers as the fake news. Sometimes I don't know if I should laugh or cry when I hear another fact checker coming up, because I felt like that was actually the role of journalists all along.
Well, joining me to unravel fact from fiction, we have Dutch MEP Marietje Schaake, who we've just seen speaking earlier at that conference, Euronews correspondent Maeve McMahon, and the Sunday Times EU correspondent Andrew Byrne. Now, I will start with you, Marietje. Is it the role of journalists to fight fake news, and are we not doing our jobs? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's actually not what I'm saying. I'm actually trying to empower journalists, because I think if we continue to erect more structures and more regulations and more ideas to challenge so-called fake news, which I rather talk about either junk news or disinformation, then I think we're actually diminishing the role that journalists already play. And if anything, I would like to say reclaim your role as existing fact checkers. You don't need to invent or hire fact checkers. I would like to see journalists being responsible for that all along.
Yeah, and I mean, what about the role of politicians in that as well? And some politicians, I'm not going to say who, have called the media fake news in general.
Well, I think Donald Trump has done that. I'm happy to say that, because I think it is so problematic when one of the most powerful politicians in the world starts dismissing, entire media houses or papers as the fake news media. And this is eroding the term as well, even though there is a serious problem with disinformation and, bots spreading all kinds of rumors or unsubstantiated claims that have been made in the Brexit debate that have probably actually moved people to vote to leave the EU on false grounds. So I think there's definitely a problem, but we have to be very careful when it comes to speech, freedom of expression, what kind of measures are acceptable.
And I want to bring that to you, Maeve. I mean, when we say fake news, it's being used very loosely in a lot of places where it might refer to opinions that they don't like or agree with.
Absolutely, and we're all in our different echo chambers, I suppose. People are really only listening to what they want to hear, and they're spending time with people that they like and enjoy being around, that have the same opinions as them. And that's why a lot of people on their Facebook feeds, for example, or their Instagram posts, everyone's writing about the same, and that's why people don't get it when things go the way they don't want them to go.
Yes, and that when you talk about Facebook and Twitter, that's technology there. And I mean, does it help or aggravate the problem? Because we're talking about the echo chamber, when you read certain news and you just keep getting the same opinion.
Yes. Well, I think this plays into this whole debate of what responsibility. I mean, I totally agree. Journalists have a huge responsibility to be arbiters of accuracy in people they're interviewing. But I think there's also increasing pressure on publishers, digital publishers, Twitter and Facebook, to take their responsibility seriously. And of course, this is an age-old debate of the balance of limiting free speech with the right of people to accurate information. And I don't think we've found an answer to it yet. But I think the pressure will continue to grow on actors like Facebook and Twitter because they themselves are the interfaces for much of this news.
But they are not publishers right now. And so they can hide behind the intermediary liability exception. I know it's jargon, but it basically means that they are neutral platforms. And I think that will have to be challenged because they are not neutral. They are also engaging in helping, fight what they call fake news or taking down terrorist content or all kinds of other things. So the claim that they don't have editorial responsibility no longer holds, I believe. But furthermore, their business model, the way that you're pushed to see more of the same because it may hook you to their platform longer is something that I think we need to really look at.
But don't you think there's a difference between blatant terrorist or extremist propaganda or content versus something that is grey? That would you give that responsibility to a platform, to those tech giants, and say to control content?
No, I actually think we should not be privatizing law enforcement and content moderation the way we are now, because indeed there's a huge difference between illegal speech, which is in limited cases can be illegal, like you said, terrorist content can be, or child pornography is another very clear example. But when it comes to legal speech that is taken down, or legal speech that is leading to all kinds of challenges, like let's say in the Netherlands now we have a very heated debate about parents who don't want to vaccinate their children because they believe it's actually bad for their children. But by not doing that, they create risks for other children. So, while we don't want to ban speech about question marks around vaccinations, public health is a legitimate concern. So I think illegal speech is clear. Undesired speech or problematic speech is a whole different category. Right. You can't just ban that.
Very quickly, Maeve, what did you want to add?
Fake news is one thing, but journalism is another. And journalists are guilty of that. What we often see is something published and then suddenly it's spread like wildfire on Twitter or on various medias of communication. So journalists have to be forensic about doing their job.
This is certainly an ongoing conversation. I mean, there's it's a lot of grey areas in this and a lot of conversation to be had. All right, we'll leave it at that because we're moving on to a story we're also watching today in Brussels. The city honoured British Labour MP Jo Cox by naming a square after her. The ceremony took place in the city centre, close to the Ancienne Belgique music venue, which Cox loved to visit. Family, friends and colleagues gathered to remember the politician. The mayor called her love of Brussels remarkable. Cox worked at Parliament as an assistant to an MEP, and she was murdered in 2016 in June by a far-right extremist in the midst of the Brexit campaign. All right, Maeve, you had gone to that event today. Can you tell us what that was like? What was the mood and
Absolutely. Well, I was the first reporter there this morning at 7 on Good Morning Europe on Euronews, and then I was the last one to leave at 3. So I saw it all. I saw how it started. I saw how the square this morning was just an old kind of abandoned square, if you like, just hidden behind Ancienne Belgique, the very popular music venue. But by 1 p.m, it was full of people. Almost a little bit like a Labour Party conference, in fact, because a lot of them had come over, including Jeremy Corbyn. But it was actually very nice. I spoke to, of course, Jo Cox. It was a very... Jo Cox is his sister. Sorry, it's been a long day. And it's a very difficult day for her and for her parents, of course. But she was really happy that it was the friends of Jo Cox who came up with this idea to put this square in her honour in Brussels.
All right, let's take a look at that clip that you did for us today.
I miss Jo every day, in every single way, really. Just those little things like ringing up when you've got some news, finding out about the kids. Really simple stuff, I think, as anyone would probably miss someone so close to them.
And if she was alive today, what would she say about the state of the Brexit negotiations?
I think Jo would be extremely saddened that things have gone the way they have in terms of Brexit and in terms of our relationship with Europe. But equally, she would never give up hope, and she would want to keep working towards a solution as much as we possibly can.
And what would she think about the disunity in Europe at the moment?
Jo would be extremely sad. You know, Jo had many identities. She was a proud Yorkshire lass. She was from Yorkshire in England. She would consider herself a proud inhabitant of Great Britain, but she would have considered herself a strong European as well. And I think she'd be extremely sad that identity potentially is being fractured.
And what will this mean, having a plaque here in the city centre of Brussels in her honour, the Jo Cox Plaque?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a wonderful tribute from the Mayor and from the people of Brussels to remember Jo and the many happy times she shared with her friends in this city that she really loved. You know, it was a very special time for Jo. She was here in her 20s. She celebrated her 30th birthday here. We all came over and had a big party. So to have a permanent reminder of Jo and the values that she held is very special for us as a family.
And finally, do you think the square in the city centre of Brussels will be used as a place to protest or for people to go if they want to create more social justice?
I hope that Jo's Square will be used as a place to create happy memories. I hope it'll be used as a place where people come and reflect on things and remember Jo and the values that she held. And come together in a positive way. It'd be really lovely to think of lots of very happy memories being created.
I mean, given the circumstances, very touching gesture there also from the city. Thank you for that report, Maeve. Now, don't go away because we have a lot more coming up in the program. European leaders warn about a return to the 1930s if people don't stand up to nationalism. Plus, US President Trump is celebrated online for how he refers to a Kurdish journalist. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, it is a powerful group with what they hope will be a powerful message. Today, current and former political leaders penned an op-ed in 3 European newspapers warning that Europe could return to the 1930s if it doesn't stand up to nationalism. The group includes former prime ministers from Romania and Italy, Maltese leader Joseph Muscat, and Guy Verhofstadt, ALDE president and former prime minister of Belgium. Now, they wrote this: "We refuse to be a new generation of sleepwalkers. We must act now or the European project will stall. Worse, it could be suffocated by nationalist and populist forces." And of course, we are back with our panel. Maeve McMahon, our political reporter at Euronews. Andrew Byrne is Europe correspondent for the Sunday Times. And Eva Kaili, Greek MEP with the SND party. Now, I've read the op-ed that they've written today. A lot of grand words, a lot of, big ideas. But they talk about action. But except, is the action clear enough? What action are they talking about? Eva, I'll put that to you.
Well, I think it's really important to see forces of the progressives to join here and at least try to set up a new vision for Europe. We have elections in a few months. Try to fight populism with messages that will be positive and not negative, trying to establish security, control, but not hate and anti-immigration.
Because in the
rhetoric.
letter they said that they would even be prepared to renegotiate treaties. I mean, treaties, does that mean as core, as central as the freedom of movement, for example, which is such a big deal when it comes to migration?
Well, I think we try to have more Europe, and I do believe this is important. So basically it says, and I think it's very interesting, that we have to be able to support member states where they cannot, where they are powerless. And I think, like in the migration crisis, it seemed that we needed the European solidarity and support, and we have to even change treaties if we can ensure that this would happen. And we have S&D leaders, ALDE, working together and have a different voice.
Across parties, that is. Andrew, are you convinced reading this that this is enough to counter nationalism that is on the rise?
Well, I think it's very commendable that the writers of the letter have sort of said that we won't sleepwalk into authoritarianism, and there is a risk of authoritarian decline in parts of the EU. But at the same time, for a call to action, I found this article remarkably lacking in detail or plans. It talked a lot about justice, peace, freedom. These are all lovely terms. It's a bit like motherhood and apple pie, though. I mean, who's really going to object to it? And one of the actions that was spoken about, and it was said we want to help where member states or national governments are powerless, and it mentioned digital taxation. The problem is not that member states are powerless, it's that they're unwilling to pool sovereignty in these areas. So I think the writers of this letter have a bit of work to do before the elections to make these grand aspirations practical and relevant.
No, absolutely. And when you put more Europe versus more sovereignty, I mean, this is exactly the debate we've been having right across Europe.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing this morning from the likes of Guy Verhofstadt, this is very typical. It's 8 months to go till Europeans go to vote. It's next May, those elections coming up. And we're going to see more and more of this coming out of Guy Verhofstadt. He's voiced his concern in the last few weeks about Hungary, about Poland. We've been reporting every day about those stories. And he wants to show that they can come together. And of course, as well, what we might see coming after post-May is Macron's party on March coming together with Guy Verhofstadt's here in the group, and their eye is on that ball because ECR, of course, European Conservatives and Reformists, will get much smaller, so all the British MEPs will have to pack up and leave. So the ALDE have their eye now on being the third party.
10 seconds.
It's not that, but I think there are intentions for a different Europe and a new vision. And I think, as I said, we really need to join forces now in this Europe. So this is a good start. I agree, we need more details,
a lot more.
But it's a good start.
Yeah, and in that letter, actually, special mention was Italy. And that's where we're heading to now, because Italy's anti-establishment government is drawing up its first budget. And it's fair to say that they've raised expectations. The country's Deputy Prime Minister, Luigi Di Maio, vowing to abolish poverty through increases in welfare spending. A political battle is underway in Italy. The Five-Star Movement and the right-wing League have been locked in negotiations with the economy minister. The populists want to ramp up welfare spending, but Giovanni Tria, the man who holds the purse strings, has his eyes firmly set on Italy's troubling public finances. He's reportedly insisting that the budget deficit should not exceed 2% of national output. But the two populist parties apparently want the target set at 2.5% to meet their expensive campaign spending pledges. Following their advice would mean picking a fight with Brussels, which has a 3% budget deficit limit. Abolish poverty. It's a big promise, isn't it, Andrew?
Well, why didn't anyone think of that before, right? I mean, abolishing poverty, if it could be done like that, I guess it would have been done before. I think what we're witnessing with this story is the Five-Star Movement having an identity crisis. It's watching its opinion support levels plummet while the coalition partners in the League see their support rise. And so I think while the League have been using the migration story very cynically to increase their support levels, the Five-Star Movement now are panicking and they're pushing for more welfare spending, more of their basic income trials, for instance. And I think it'll be interesting to watch this evening. Will the deficit be within under 2%, in which case I think we can avoid a clash, or will it go higher, in which case we might see a market response?
But we've been talking about France also in terms of budget deficit. I mean, do you think Italy is getting a lot less leeway than France is getting? Who'd like to answer that?
Well, I think the Italian case, like the Greek case, we were left alone with the migration crisis. So populism there is flourishing. We have governments of populism in both countries. So I think this is a kind of different situation. In France, I think they had all the traditional parties. They have to reinvent themselves too, in order to pass these reforms and not allow Le Pen to be actually the next to take over.
Yeah, a lot of budgets actually coming up that we will be closely watching.
Reforms are never easy in any country.
Absolutely. All right. Now let's move on, because U.S. President Trump, he's being hailed a hero on Twitter today, and it's all over how he referred to a Kurdish journalist during a news conference. Alex Morgan in Lyon in the Cube has this story. Alex.
Tessa, it was a fairly extraordinary news conference, wasn't it? It went on for a long time, and there was an unsuspecting journalist in the audience who became an internet sensation afterwards following this exchange. I'll just show you the video we posted on our Twitter feed.
Please, Mr. Kurd. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. President. Two quickly questions. What will be the USA relations with the Kurds?
Oh, I thought I just answered that.
Post-ISIS. And
Okay, we're trying to get along great with the Kurds. We're trying to help them a lot. Don't
So
forget,
just to stop that there, it was that initial interaction, Donald Trump talking up the relationship after that, but saying Mr. Kurd to the journalist. Now, people initially thought, that's a bit insensitive, but it's had the opposite effect. We spoke to Rahim Rashidi, the journalist referred to as Mr. Kurd, this morning on our programme, Good Morning Europe. But he's also tweeted to say, no, I'm proud and I'm thanking the president. He said the same to us. He is thanking Donald Trump for saying Mr. Kurd. And there's other journalists like Zinar here saying, we're all proud Kurds. The fact the president is recognising our ethnicity is brilliant. He's saying now in all future press conferences, we will introduce ourselves as Mr. Kurd as our intro. So, Tessa, an unexpected twist to that conference.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Alex and the CUBE team in Lyon. Well, that is not the only quote from Donald Trump that had people talking this week. Let's take a look at tonight's Raw Moment.
They weren't laughing at me. They were laughing with me. We had fun. That was not laughing at me. So, the fake news said people laughed at President Trump. They didn't laugh at me. People had a good time with me. We were doing it together. We had a good time.
If you look at Mr. Pillsbury, the leading authority on China, he was on a good show, I won't mention the name of the show, recently, and he was saying that China has total respect for Donald Trump and for Donald Trump's very, very large brain.
I'll just put you on the spot here. Donald Trump, one word.
Big.
Okay. Eva.
I can just say Miss Greece wouldn't be bad. But this is insane that we talk about this, no?
He's a huge entertainer, and I needed that laughter therapy, so thank you, Donald Trump, for that.
Entertainer, indeed. All right, thank you to all of our panelists. And, of course, thank you for watching us here on Raw Politics. We'd like to hear your views on what you're talking about. I'm on Twitter, @Tessa Ercilia, or follow us at Euronews. Use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening.